My wife has just single-handedly helped me get control of a situation that was spiraling downward quickly. And instead of saying thank you, the first words out of my mouth come with an angry tone. Seriously, Katie, I was going to clean this up. What do you think? Do you think I was just going to leave it like this? Of course, you had to come down here and get mad at me about it. Wait, what? She hadn't said a word to me yet. Does it seem like you can't even have a conversation without it turning into an argument in your relationship? Or maybe you're one of those couples where you can't even be in the same room without fighting about something. Well, if I asked you, why do you think most couples fight? I'm guessing you might respond with common things that couples fight about. You know, things like money, sex, kids, and so on. And those things might be the context for arguments in a relationship, but what if I told you that they're not the real cause? You know, most of the advice around the issue of arguments in a relationship will talk about common causes of arguments between couples. Things like not listening, saying the wrong thing, and thoughtlessness. Well, if you argue a lot in your relationship, you might agree that those are common causes. You might even be thinking, you know what, that's right. He or she never listens, and when I bring it up, they always say the wrong thing because they're thoughtless and they just don't care about my needs. And you may be right. That may be true. But you might be surprised to learn that those things, they don't get to the root of the problem either. And that is why most of the advice being given about how to stop arguing, it's not working. Well, in the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you about what does work. And the truth is, it works so well that I want to challenge you to take what you learned today and implement it the next time you have an argument. And then I want you to come back here and tell us about your results. Hi, I'm Dustin Cannon. My wife Katie and I are the creators of the Shimley Effect and the Marriage Reset Intensive Program. Psychologists will usually say that the number one cause of arguments and fights in relationships is a lack of mutual empathy and understanding. And that's a huge part of it. Empathy is the ability to understand how someone feels and where they're coming from. But there's something else going on when people argue that makes it so much worse. We all do it, and it drives every argument. It is what causes silly things to turn into big fights. And this happens when we make assumptions about how the other person feels or where they're coming from. You know, it's one thing to lack empathy. But the real problem happens when we make assumptions about people's motives or question their intent. Try and think of an argument that you had with your partner or your spouse that was not made by statements or accusations where you assumed something about their motives, why they did what they did. Question their intent. You know, here's an example from my own marriage where I was guilty of making assumptions and questioning my wife Katie's intent. This is a good example of a situation that should have never ended up in an argument or hurt feelings. Now, let me preface this with saying that I'm aware that my wife Katie, she likes for the house to be picked up and everything in its place. She does not like it when things are just strewn about. You know, I know that. Well, one evening, Katie was upstairs, most of the evening lying down because of back pain. She'd recently had her 4th back surgery, I think it was. Well, I'd been downstairs watching the kids and making their dinner. The house was an absolute disaster. The kids had dumped all their toys out on the floor. There were Legos everywhere. Dishes were piled on the counter in the kitchen. I was serving macaroni and cheese, and then there was another crisis with the baby, so I spilled macaroni and cheese and stuff on the counter and floor, and I hadn't had a chance to clean it up yet. Well, right in the middle of this tsunami of kids and children, Katie comes down and with a why can't you do anything right judgmental look on her face, at least that's how I saw it. With the stern, methodical efficiency of an army general, Katie takes charge, commanding the children to pick up their toys, and of course they jump into action, which irritates me because I'd already told them 5 times without response, but anyway, she hadn't said a word, and then she started cleaning up the kitchen. And so get this, my wife has just single-handedly helped me get control of a situation that was spiraling downward quickly. And instead of saying thank you, the first words out of my mouth come with an angry tone. Seriously, Katie, I was going to clean this up. What do you think? Do you think I was just going to leave it like this? Of course, you had to come down here and get mad at me about it. Wait, what? She hadn't said a word to me yet. Well, I'm here to tell you that she had a few words to say now. She replied, I'm going back upstairs. You can sleep down here. Now I'm thinking, what just happened? What just happened was I made assumptions about what she was thinking, how she was feeling, and why she was doing what she was doing. I questioned her intent. Listen, when you question someone's intentions, it makes them get defensive. And the moment someone gets defensive, communication shuts down. At that point, they're no longer hearing anything that you have to say. The problem was I made it all about me. And I assumed that she was mad. I interpreted her swift, stern response and lack of words to mean that she was mad at me and judging me for not being able to handle the situation. I made up in my own mind that she was angry with me and that she was thinking something like, well, if he could just do his job, I wouldn't have to come down here and take care of this when I'm already in so much pain. But the thing is, she didn't say that. That was all in my mind. Think about some of the arguments that you've had with your spouse. Think about the moment that it started to escalate to the point where no one was listening anymore and both of you were getting angry. What were you thinking? What was said on both sides? There's a good chance that it involved assumptions about the other person's feelings or their motives or their intentions. All right, so taking what we've learned so far, let's talk about some ways that we could use this information to avoid or stop arguing in our relationships and marriages. Here are 3 ways to avoid or stop arguing in your relationship or marriage. Number 1, stop making assumptions. Have you heard the phrase, when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me? I told myself I wasn't going to use that cliche, but I couldn't help it because it's just so true. When we talk about questioning someone's motives or making assumptions about why they did something, some relationship coaches will tell you to always assume a positive intent. They say that you should just assume that there's a good reason for their behavior. And that's good advice, but here's the problem with that. That often works, but it doesn't work in all situations. That advice doesn't work when your spouse or partner's done something that really hurt your feelings or that seemed really unthoughtful. I'm talking about situations where you can't imagine any possible way their behavior could have been done with a positive intent towards you. So what do you do then? In a situation when there's no possible way that they could have done it with a positive intent, at least that no possible way that you can think of, you first need to acknowledge that the reason for their behavior, it might have nothing to do with you at all. Like my wife always says to me, that not everything's about you, Dustin. I know, shocking, right? Second, it's important to realize that there may be factors impacting their behavior that you know nothing about. For example, when my wife came down, she had a look on her face that I interpreted as mad or irritated. The truth is, she was just in a lot of pain from her back surgery. And so it's important to try and reserve judgment until you have more information. Now, I know that's hard, especially when you've been hurt or feel disrespected. But if you don't do that, if you don't hold off on judgment until you have more information, you may never get to the real reason. And more importantly, you may never make that connection that you really want to stop the cycle of arguments. Listen, when we question someone's intent by making accusations about their motives, it makes them defensive. And like we talked about earlier, the moment someone gets defensive, all communication shuts down, and they will no longer hear anything you have to say. And that's true regardless of their actual intent or motives. It's just human nature. Unfortunately, when you make these types of accusations and they get defensive and communication shuts down, the argument it's only going to escalate. And even though their defensiveness has nothing to do with whether you're right or wrong about their motives, you will be tempted to interpret that escalation as proof that you're right. And that is just going to cause more problems. And so the first thing is to either assume positive intent if you can, but if you can't, imagine positive intent because of the hurtful nature of their behavior, at least try not to make any assumptions at all. You're going to need more information, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Number 2, establish rapport. I know what you're thinking. You're like, what? Establish rapport? What are you talking about? Isn't that something that you do in meeting new people or potential clients? Let me explain. Because when you do this right, the benefits go way beyond not just arguing. When you can establish and maintain rapport in your relationship, it will have a positive impact on your relationship in so many ways. It can help revive your love and the passion in your marriage. Now, contrary to popular belief, rapport is something that must be continually established and maintained. It's not a one-time thing. Rapport happens when we connect with people through mutual understanding of one another on some level. Rapport is being established when people are in sync with each other. Now, earlier we talked about how the cause of most arguments can be tied to a lack of mutual empathy, right? And just for review, remember that empathy is the ability to recognize and understand where someone's coming from or how they feel. Empathy helps us to establish rapport or connection with another person because it makes them feel like they're being heard. Now, you don't always have to understand the other person completely. You won't be able to anyway. They just need to feel like you care enough to hear them. And if you can learn to do that effectively, anger and animosity, it'll usually just fizzle out. Have you ever had a big fight with someone that got pretty bad, and then eventually when it was all over, you were both sitting there feeling connected and on the same page, enough to look past the details, and maybe you got to that point and one of you apologized and said something like, "I'm sorry, I was out of line and inconsiderate." And immediately, the other person responds with something similar, saying, no, it's really my fault. I should have never put you in that position, and so on. We see that all the time. Have you ever wondered what just happened? Well, this happens when people finally come in sync or establish rapport with one another through a sense of mutual empathy. I'm sure this has happened to you at least once or twice. Well, what if there was a shortcut that could get you there faster without all the contention in between? In the Shimley Effect and our Marriage Reset Intensive program, we teach strategies that you can implement which will help you to establish and maintain rapport more quickly so that you can come in sync with one another and get past the cycle of arguments. And listen, because we know that you may be the only one trying to improve your relationship, the strategies we teach for establishing rapport in a relationship, they go beyond just using words. You know, they say, I think that 90% of our communication is nonverbal. That's why we teach strategies to achieve rapport using body language and other nonverbal communication. These strategies can guide the conversation to that mutual sense of connection and understanding so much faster. And the other person won't even know that you were intentional about making that happen. Number 3, closest, obvious, but minimal truth. This is a concept that we developed for diffusing arguments in many different situations. Have you ever heard the phrase on a need-to-know basis? Well, it's kind of like that. Remember, people want to be heard. They want to feel like they are understood. Think about the situation we talked about earlier. Now, I started the fight. I caused hard feelings because I made assumptions about why my wife, Katie, was helping clean up. I questioned her motives, and that made her get mad, defensive, and she lashed back. Well, using the concept of closest, obvious, but minimal truth, instead of making negative assumptions about her motives without all the information, I could have assumed that she had a positive intent, or that her response had nothing to do with me, and that she was simply picking up because the house was messy. Obvious, right? That's the closest, obvious, but minimal response. Why was she picking up? Because it was messy. Okay, now let's look at it from Katie's perspective. Now, remember, I started the argument when I said, "Seriously, Katie, I was going to clean this up. What did you think? I was just going to leave it like this?" That made her mad. It made her get defensive, and she had every right to be because it was rude and disrespectful on my part. But let's say that she had wanted to avoid an argument and instead focus on building rapport to diffuse my bad attitude right there. She could have simply said the closest obvious but minimal truth, which might have been something like, "Oh, no, I knew you had it under control. I just thought you might like some help." Now, we say minimal truth because although that was probably true, there's also a good chance that she was irritated by the mess and that she did see the possibility that I'd come up to bed without cleaning it all up. And she had every right to believe that because I admit I've done it before. But listen, that didn't need to be said. It would not have made a difference at that time, and it would have only caused me to get more defensive and angry myself. And then all communication would have shut down. If the closest obvious but minimal truth didn't diffuse the situation, then the next step for Katie might have been to ask me some questions to try and get a better understanding of how I was feeling and why I was angry. You know, in any situation where the other party is angry, we've found the response most likely to establish an empathetic connection is to ask questions. Because remember, people want to feel heard, and when they feel heard, it leads to a sense of connection, rapport, and mutual empathy. In the example that I gave earlier, Katie could have said something like, "Why did my helping you clean up make you feel that way? Because, you know, if I've made you feel like I was judging you or something in the past, I want to make sure I don't do that again." Now, you may feel like you should not be the one backing down or taking an apologetic stance because you might not think you did anything wrong. Just like Katie, she didn't do anything wrong. She didn't do anything to justify my snapping at her like I did, that's for sure. But here's the thing. Someone has to take charge of your relationship. If things are going to change, then someone has to lead and guide your relationship out of this negative cycle. And if you don't do it, who will? Now rest assured, the strategies that we teach will not make you a doormat. In fact, it's actually the opposite. These strategies and most of the strategies we teach in the Shimley effect are based on the concept of intentionally redirecting negative energy and then guiding it to a better place. The truth is, if you follow these strategies, it will almost always create empathy on both sides. And in the end, your spouse or your partner who was the angry one in the first place is more likely to come to see the situation for how it really was and apologize. All right, listen, if this made sense to you and you want to be notified whenever we publish new content like this, please be sure and subscribe to this channel and click the little bell notification so you'll be notified when we publish new videos. You may also want to head over to our website to learn more about our free marriage workshop. Thank you.